And we're back. Okay, so chapter 4 is called Mental Case, ? And before I start this chapter, I've got a quotation from the film Adaptation, which was made in 2002. The character Charlie Kaufman, played by John Cusack, said to himself, I put this quote in: "Do I have an original thought in my head, my bald head? Maybe if I were happier, my hair wouldn't be falling out. Life is short. I need to make the most of it. Today is the first day of the rest of my life. I'm a walking cliche. I really need to go to the doctor again and have my leg checked. There's something wrong, a bump. The dentist called again. I'm way overdue. If I stopped putting things off, I would be happier. All I do is sit in my fat ass. If my ass wasn't fat, I would be happier. I wouldn't have to wear these shirts with the tails out all the time. Like that's fooling anyone. Fat ass. I should start jogging again. 5 miles a day. Really do it this time. Maybe rock climbing. I need to turn my life around. What do I need to do? I need to fall in love. I need to have a girlfriend. I need to read more, improve myself. What if I learned Russian or something, or took up an instrument? I could speak Chinese. I'd be the screenwriter who speaks Chinese and plays the oboe. That would be cool. I should get my hair cut short. Stop trying to fool myself and everyone else into thinking I have a full head of hair. How pathetic is that? Just be real, confident. Isn't that what women are attracted to? Men don't have to be attractive, but that's not true, especially these days. Almost as much pressure on men as there is on women these days. Why should I be made to feel I have to apologise for my existence? Maybe it's my brain chemistry. Maybe that's what's wrong with me. Bad chemistry. All my problems and anxiety can be reduced to a chemical imbalance, or some kind of misfiring synapses. I need to get help for that, but I'll still be ugly though. Nothing's going to change that. Okay, I've also got a couple of little quotes at the top of this chapter. So one states by Blaise Pascal, men are so necessarily mad that not to be mad would amount to another form of madness. And I put in, everyone's normal till you get to know them, which is the name of a book that I read years ago, which is good. And normal is a spin on a washing machine. Okay, so chapter 4, mental case. With the advent of the DSM, the world became mad. There's hundreds of disorders, curious concoctions in this trusty cookbook, with new ones created all the time. Take narcissistic personality disorder, for example, which pertains to those with an overinflated sense of importance. It's crazy, pun intended, that there's a medical diagnosis for someone who's a legend in their own mind. Or take body dysmorphic disorder, which entails being intensely dissatisfied with their appearance. People are anxious because they feel like a munter. 1 in 50 people are diagnosed with a serious psychiatric disorder, and eating disorders affect millions. Anorexia, which is voluntary starvation, is the most fatal. Lest we forget the infamous obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, which seems to be in fashion. Personality disorders are notably the most common psychiatric disorder. They're diagnosed in about 50% of patients, and it's not uncommon for people to have more than one. But worse, many people have them and they don't know that they have them. They think that they're normal, and there's no real cure for them, which range from mild to severe. It seems we're not in good shape. As touched on, depression and anxiety are rampant, like self-harm for teenagers and ADHD for kids. Indeed, our problems are literally endless. But does it need to be this way? Do we need to be so mental? It seems we've medicalised the human condition to the great profit of Big Pharma. We get sick as they get rich. Antidepressants, for example, rake in billions, like ADHD drugs. Ploughing hyper kids with cocaine-like drugs benefits everyone. We're all happier on drugs. And we also all arguably have something wrong. We're all a standard deviation away from madness. It seems we're all at risk of being mental because it comes with the human condition, but there's a dastardly progression from mental health problems to mental illness to mental disease. It's argued, however, that the diseases contained in this official book are not proven, but rather psychiatry has endeavoured to emulate medical science. Our problems are much more psychology, man-made, than a disease with a definite pathology. Our problems are largely in the mind, which is the brain's fault or that inner man's. According to the existentialists, depression, anxiety, anguish, boredom, alienation, absurdity, and so on is normal, as our soul is screaming for meaning. As psychiatrist Eric Fromm said, it is a fully sane person who feels isolated in the insane society. The existential claim is that much mental illness is grounded in nihilism. It matters that there's no point. For existentialists, life is suffering, responsibility, and truth. Life's not all sunshine and rainbows. It's the crack and heroin that provides the sunshine and rainbows. Not dissimilar, the Buddhist premise is life is suffering. Buddha also pertained to psychology as opposed to phantom pathology. He said, what we are today comes from the thoughts of yesterday, and our present thoughts build our life of tomorrow. Our life is the creation of our mind. He also said, All that we are is a result of what we have thought. Thought precedes action. We're always thinking. We're governed by motives and intentions, and often we dwell in nonsense and worse, dement ourselves with demented thoughts. If only we could select our thoughts like we select our clothes, choosing only the most befitting. The social psychological principle states that what we believe, we believe what we hear ourselves say. So what narratives do we rehearse in our mind? What do we own, like we're a mental case or not? While psychology gives us feedback, i.e. signs and symptoms, it's highlighted that every diagnosis in the DSM is negative and attributes responsibility to the person. The person is blamed for not being okay as opposed to the environment that births not okayness. The DSM undermines society's contribution, like the breakdown of families and the garbage we're conditioned with. Like looks and money are super important when it's actually love. Babies literally die without love. Dysfunctional environments give rise to dysfunctional minds, like kids who experience severe trauma during childhood can go on to develop serious mental illness, like schizophrenia and psychosis in adulthood. Early childhood affects gene expression. How we deal with stress, for example, is also crucial. In short, no good can come from being a stress cat. Perception is paramount because it dictates how we respond. Respectively, it makes sense to aspire to being a breezy B personality as opposed to an anal A personality type. The world could be doing with lightening up, let go of what we can, or take a Valium. The contention is thus that most mental illness makes sense. Like it makes sense that people get depressed and that soldiers invariably suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder after war. Even the proper crazies like the psychotics are not that crazy when we get to the root of the madness. Fundamentally, everyone has a story, and that's where the healing starts. Postmodern philosopher Jacques Derrida, who lived from 1930 to 2004, notably pertained to deconstructionism. That is, to understand the structure of something, we need to understand its genesis. For existentialists, we are a being in the world. We become in relation to others. We act and react in context. John Mabiti, philosopher and writer, said, "I am because we are, and because we are, therefore I am," which is a spin on Descartes' "I think, therefore I am" maxim. And we play different roles and indeed games. We have needs and devise all kinds of ploys to get our needs met. Like we need attention and recognition. Some of us monitor our behaviour more than others. We care about what people think. We want to assimilate with the herd. It's imperative for the sake of our mental health. Some of us want to please people, or we need to be perfect or be strong. Some of us are neurotic and take on too much responsibility. Others don't take on enough. When it comes to our mental health, it seems we are both the problem and the solution as we entertain our thoughts. Like we tell ourselves we need to harm ourselves, or wash our hands for the millionth time, or lie in bed all day and not answer our phone, or watch porn and masturbate until red raw, or entertain a suicidal ideation, or whatever. People are compelled. And whilst we tend to think our minds are impervious to outside forces like demons, for example, intrusive thoughts are a common complaint. People speak about negative automatic thoughts that gatecrash their mind. It's like they've got no control over their thoughts, which literally drives them up the pole. They make themselves mad, and why would a sane person do that? Whilst we'll get back to the battle of the mind later, but for the purposes of this chapter, we need to elaborate on schizophrenia, because people who hear voices, not our own thoughts, insist our minds are not inviolate to metaphysical entities. Unlike our own inner voice or internal dialogue, people who hear voices claim they have an alien quality to them, and it doesn't come from them. We'll also address multiple personality disorder, because this is quite unlike any other personality disorder. So, schizophrenia is typified by hallucinations and delusions. Delusions are fixed false beliefs, like we think we're Napoleon or the Queen of Sheba, but we're not, we've crossed the line. Schizophrenia is used interchangeably with psychosis, which refers to being out of touch with reality. Like people can think events are happening that aren't, like the TV is conspiring against them, or magazines and newspapers. The walls are indeed listening. People can be tormented by abusive voices. Sometimes voices threaten the person and command them to do dangerous and unacceptable things. Like my friend's brother stayed at his girlfriend's house one night, and her dad, who has schizophrenia, was told by Satan to kill the wife. He opted to sacrifice the family dog instead, which the family discovered when they got up the next day, which is a close call for the wife. Or the voices might tell people to harm themselves or indeed kill themselves. Voices can be extremely powerful and threatening, like they threaten to kill the person if they disobey. The cause of schizophrenia is unknown, but most experts support the stress vulnerability model theory. That is, we're all vulnerable as determined by biological, psychological, and environmental factors. So we're all at risk, but some people are more vulnerable than others. A stressful or traumatic event can sometimes trigger the symptoms, like hearing voices in vulnerable people, like a recent bereavement, sexual abuse during childhood or adulthood, severe trauma, solitary confinement, sleep deprivation, very high temperatures, or physical illness. Or we can inadvertently give ourselves psychosis. We can engineer our own schizophrenic downfall through our lifestyle, like cannabis-induced psychosis, alcohol-induced psychosis, LSD-induced psychosis. If depressed for long enough, people can develop depression-induced psychosis. Insomnia can trigger psychosis. We need sleep and clearly go crazy without it. Bipolar, formerly known as manic depression, can similarly be triggered in vulnerable people. With mania, which is an explosion of high in life behaviour, people are dancing on the razor edge. Drugs can also induce bipolar, as can stress and exhaustion, so-called stress-induced bipolar. It seems genes switch on in response to stress. It's postulated that mental illness could be genetic or biological in origin, manifested as a result of some innate intolerance to stress. Scientists inform that chronic stress predisposes our brain to mental illness, and that stress in adolescence can affect the expression of severe mental illness, including schizophrenia. Stress can also contribute to the worsening of symptoms. Like in schizophrenia, it can encourage hallucinations and delusions, while in bipolar, it can trigger episodes of both depression and mania. In summary, insanity is arguably a sane response to an insane world. It's a normal existential response to the absurdity, and we each have our own breaking point. Often the most sensitive and clever are susceptible. We're like pressure cookers dealing with heat, aka stress, or for some vulnerable people, a ticking time bomb. Lane concedes mental illness can be understood as bizarre behaviour, which is a rational and understandable response to unusual social pressure. Mental illness is not subsiding, and it won't until we address the underlying causes of it. It's also possible there's more at play than what we're programmed with, but we'll get to this actual craziness later. Multiple personality disorder entered the DSM-3 in 1980, and in 1994 the term was dropped in favour of Dissociative Identity Disorder, DID. 2 or more personalities are required for this diagnosis, but it's not uncommon for people to have more than 100 personalities. Multiple personality disorder was notably popularised after Sybil, the true story of a woman who had 16 personalities, became a best-selling book in 1973, and then a movie. In the last 40 years, unprecedented numbers, millions of cases have been reported, particularly in North America. It seems there's something very peculiar going on. Each personality or alter has its own age and sex, likes and dislikes, goals and memories. Each has its own different handwriting, mannerisms, abilities like artistic or musical, eyesight, posture, strength, and can not only speak differently, i.e. accents and speech patterns, but also in different languages. Each personality or insider has different thoughts, feelings, expressions, and values. Like some might be promiscuous and like spending cash, whereas others are consumed with self-hatred, self-harm, and punishment. The alter may even want to kill the person. Other personalities may have mood swings and panic attacks. The core personality can also have certain illnesses that the alters don't have, like they may have diabetes, but when they're in an alter, they no longer have diabetes. One identity can be allergic to bee stings, and another can have high cholesterol, or one personality can be drunk and high in drugs, but when they switch into another personality, they're sober. It defies medical logic. Dissociative identity disorder is seen as an extreme form of a more common symptom, dissociation. People who dissociate feel detached and may have spells of amnesia. Mild dissociation could be daydreaming or getting lost in the moment, or highway hypnosis, which happens when drivers forget that they were driving. They drive automatically without thinking. Apparently, cows dissociate when it's freezing outside, and people can actively dissociate through meditation, like yogis are excellent at dissociating. But with DID, the core personality is usurped by other personalities. Another personality comes out to play in that trance-like state. Switching can take seconds, minutes, or days, and the core personality has no idea what the other personalities have been up to. They may come back to their core self in places unknown and see the destruction that has been left in the wake of their other personalities, which includes self-mutilation. Dissociative identity disorder and other dissociative disorders are nearly always said to be caused by severe childhood abuse and trauma, e.g., repeated physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. As a defense mechanism, dissociation means that ideas can be cut off or detached from mainstream consciousness, i.e. we dissociate from a situation or experience because it's too violent, traumatic, or painful to assimilate with our conscious self. Like soldiers, for example, might not remember what happened, or car crash victims, or childhood abuse might be forgotten. So we can hide trauma, we can stash it in the unconscious. The memory is compartmentalized. Our clever brains create amnesic barriers around the traumatic event so we don't remember. It's suggested that abused children imagined these events were happening to someone else, prompting an alter ego to grow in isolation behind a wall of amnesia. Thus, there's a new personality for the abused, yet the child's original personality would have no memory of the trauma. Some personalities remember repressed memories, like a small child might inform about sexual abuse, whereas the core self remains unaware. Rather than a disorder per se, then, DID is often referred to as a highly creative survival technique because of the way in which it allows people enduring a high level of abuse to continue functioning healthily in many ways. But moreover, it came out in the wash that the CIA were involved with trauma-based mind control, which might explain the surge of people presenting at psychiatric clinics with DID from the 1970s. Untold numbers of US and Canadian citizens were abused, literally, as the CIA destroyed more than 90% of the files. We're told CIA mind control operations began in the early 1950s after World War II, when Nazi doctors and rocket scientists were snaffled into the US under Operation Paperclip. These freaks had been conducting mind control operations on the Jews and other prisoners of war in their death camps, and they continued their barbaric antics across the pond. The CIA mind control operation MKUltra, which is from German mind control, the endeavour was to develop drugs and procedures, methods of tortures to be used in interrogation to force confessions. They equally sought to protect their own agents and against interrogation from others. It said the CIA wanted a truth drug, and they discovered LSD. LSD was then used in their mind control experiments, as well as given to the herd to kickstart the Cultural Revolution. They also wanted to create the perfect spy, like someone with DID. We're told the project terminated in 1973, but it's understood that it's continued under different names and it's considerably more sophisticated. Thus, in army bases, universities and hospitals, sadistic experiments were conducted on unwitting adults and children, human guinea pigs, under the banner of national security. Methods of trauma included starvation, prodding, sensory deprivation, isolation, drugs, especially LSD, all kinds of abuse, hypnosis, and electroshocks. Electroconvulsive Therapy Ect was notably introduced in the 1930s. It involves an electric current passing through the brain. It's used to treat severe depression, catatonic schizophrenia, and severe or prolonged periods of mania. It works if it triggers convulsions and seizures. Apparently, the healing comes from the surge of neurotransmitters, which are brain chemicals brought about by the convulsions. ECT also causes memory loss. Like one woman I heard about lost all her memories, and she had to be shown how to go to the toilet again. In 1995, Bill Clinton issued a formal apology on behalf of the US government. So that was nice. So they learned that by using trauma, they could split the personality. Apparently, the best age to fracture the mind is between 18 months and 3 years. It's described as smashing a mirror, with each fragment reflecting a piece of the person. But furthermore, they could program the subpersonalities. The trauma creates a dissociation, and the dissociated state is used as an opening to hypnotically induce an alter personality. Apparently, the mind magicians can use a single trauma to create 10 alters. People can be programmed to do anything, from sex slaves to drug mules, assassins, and spies. Like they could take a patriotic American and give him a rabid communist alter to infiltrate the Soviets. They can create new memories for people. When the conscious mind absconds, like it goes to its happy place to escape the pain, the unconscious mind is wide open and very suggestible. People will believe anything, the illogical and impossible. It's like hypnosis for funsies. Someone might believe that a cat and proceed to lick themselves in meow. So the CIA learned how to create mind slaves, so-called Manchurian candidates. The hypnotherapists implant specific phrases and codes to trigger the newly programmed alters, which can be called up whenever. When activated, they switch into the prescribed alter and perform whatever task. Then they switch back, having executed the mission, none the wiser. This bodes well for interrogation purposes. They're also invariably given ECT to doubly ensure the memory is forgotten. Those under mind control describe it as being totally robotic. They can't think or question for themselves. It's noted that mind control goes back to the early 1940s with Dr. George Estabrook, chairman of the Colgate University Department of Psychology, an advisor to the military in hypnosis. Estabrook claimed he could hypnotize people even without their consent to commit treason, murder, and other crimes against the US. He claimed he used hypnosis to create super spies to carry messages and perform missions without conscious knowledge of what they're doing. So in addition to creating DID, people can be hypnotized to execute the deep state's nefarious agenda, like bump off JFK and his brother RFK, and even John Lennon for good measure. Whilst we'll get back to mind control, it's noted that CIA covert operations are linked with satanic ritual abuse. Satanic ritual abuse was out in the open from the 1970s. It's associated with the elites, the powerful and wealthy. It's understood that those born into satanic families are cracked from birth. Witnessing horrific satanic rituals, like animal and child sacrifices, is sufficient trauma to shatter young minds. It gets a lot darker because it's rumoured that satanic families run the world, and it gets a lot weirder as altars can be demonized. That is, demons or evil daemons can be attached to altars, creating superhumans. However, we'll get to all this craziness in part 2. Okay, that's chapter finished. So I'll close here and we'll start chapter 5.